All right, in these problems, it's asking us to find the inverse of each function, and then we're going to find its domain and range. So we're going to focus on finding the inverse first of these three, then I'll come back a little bit later in the video, and then we'll find the domain and range. The first one, though, it says f of x equals 1 minus 3x. And if you remember, when we're finding the inverse of something, we first need to switch our f of x to become y. We're going to say y equals 1 minus 3x, and then we have to switch our x and our y. So instead of y, I'm going to say x. And instead of this x over here, I'm going to say y. Then all we have to do is solve for y, so I'll do it real quick for you. All right, and then at the very end, here it says x minus 1 over negative 3 equals y. You can actually replace that y that you find with f inverse. So I'm going to say f inverse of x, right, equals, and then I might put this negative out front. We'll call it negative x minus 1 over 3. So that is the f inverse of this regular function, 1 minus 3x. Let's try it again with f of x equals 4 over x. So here, again, make this a y, right? And then switch your x and y. So now x equals 4 over y. And if I solve for y on this one, maybe multiply both sides by y. And then we get y times x, or just yx, or xy, either way, equals 4. Divide both sides by x. And this one's interesting because y equals 4 over x is the exact same thing that we started with. And so instead of f of x, now we can say f inverse of x is the same, 4 over x. Pretty interesting there. All right, the last one has a square, so it might be a little bit tricky. Here it says f of x equals x plus 1 quantity squared minus 4. So the same steps apply. Make this a y. X plus 1 quantity squared minus 4, and then switch your x and y. So now x equals parentheses y plus 1 squared minus 4. All right, let me solve this real quick for you for y. That's going to be the f inverse. You try it too. All right, so here I do have it solved for y, but instead of saying equals y, remember I might just say equals f inverse of x. And it's actually the square root of x plus 4 minus 1. All right, so if you remember the directions, it asks us to find the inverse of the function, and then it says then we need to find its domain and range, right? And the domain and range of the inverse of function, so the black parts there, remember the blue is the original. These are kind of interesting. If you think about it, the domain is going to be just like we found domain before, right? So here, there's a fraction, there's no x down there, there's no square root in this problem, so it's going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. However, the interesting part is the range. The range of the inverse of this black function is actually going to be the domain of your original. So if I go back to the blue and I see that this is f of x equals 1 minus 3x, okay, again, there's no fractions, and there's no square roots here. So it's also going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. So the domain and the range is how you do it. The domain is the domain of the black one. The range is the domain of the blue one. So interesting stuff. Let's try the other one here. Here they're both going to be the same because they are the same. And so 4 over x. Here the bottom is a fraction with an x in it. It cannot equal 0. And the way I would write that for the domain of the black part is going to be from negative infinity up until 0. So I'm going to union that with 0 on the other side to positive infinity. Okay, and the range is going to be the domain of the blue, a little bit tricky, but it's the domain of the blue, which is the exact same because it's the same problem. And so same thing, negative infinity to 0, union with 0 to positive infinity. Okay. The last one's probably the most interesting, where things actually happen a little bit here. So again, if I want to find the domain of this one, the domain of the black function, the inverse if you will, is going to be, let's see here, we have a square root, and inside that square root, if I set x plus 4 greater than or equal to 0, because it can be positive, it can be 0, but it cannot be negative, then what happens is I get x is greater than or equal to a negative 4 when I subtract that over. And so the domain that I would write for this is going to be, it's including the negative 4, so bracket negative 4 to positive infinity. Anything bigger, anything greater would also work. All right, that's the domain of my black function there, or the inverse. Now the range is going to be the domain of my original. In this case, which is f of x equals, in parentheses, x plus 1 squared minus 4. So in this one, are there any fractions? Are there any square roots? No, there's not. So the range of this is going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity. All right, so you find the domain and range of some functions and their inverses.